This program features Carnegie Senior Fellow Anja Kaspersen and members from the AI Ethics Initiative ThinkTech, Agnes Gierulski, Eva Charlotte Mayer, and Lukas Pöhler.
This is Anja Kaspersen with the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs and the Initiative on AI and Equality. I will be speaking today with three members from the AI Ethics Initiative ThinkTech about how to engage young professionals in responsible AI development and society outreach. Lukas and Agnes and Eva, thank you so much for being with us here today. Tell us about this initiative.
So let me go to the start. In 2017, I realized as a student of electrical engineering that there's not really any community where I could discuss on the implications of the technology I'm creating. I was at that time working in a robotics lab, doing algorithms on humanoid robots, and it's like I just realized that there are like several and challenging implications from this technology. So I discussed with a couple of like students and friends of mine, and then we said, why not? Let's find out if there are other students in a community that we can discuss these topics. And a lot of students got interested, so we started. We had a one-day workshop and introduced students, and more than 40 applicants for that workshop day, and discussed these topics on misuse of AI algorithms and also AI in healthcare. And we realized that there's a really big need of such a movement or a group or platform to come together, that people from the tech field or developers can just discuss openly about also their fears, their thoughts on the technology they're building. And during this time, our current slogan, "Think before you code," came up, because we're really into the technology, building the technology, but we don't want to don't want to be responsible. We don't know what our role is in all of this field, so we don't want to hinder innovation, but somehow be responsible in innovating it. Our core goal is to have responsible technology within a fair and just society, and this builds on three pillars. And one is that we are a platform to coordinate developers for discussion, to initiate discussion and host the discussion. The second, that we enable individuals and end users to understand and use the technology and digital technology in special. And the third is that we in fact shape the development and deployment of the technology towards responsibility. As a number of our members are developers, this is like a core goal, that we discuss and think through what is our role and how can we contribute to this responsibility.
Thank you for that, Lukas. So Agnes, can you elaborate on some of the points that Lukas just shared with us on the origin of the initiative and also where you see this initiative play a very important role?
Yeah, sure. I studied a social science degree at the Technical University of Munich, which was basically trying to do just that, bridge this gap between society and technology, and to discuss those tensions that arise there. And I was searching for something where I could actually put something into practice, and that's where I found this group. So when I got the opportunity to actually go into a more practical direction, what this actually means to develop responsible code, or how this could be approached in a real life environment. And this has been so far the goal. And the approach we are taking is to raise awareness on potential pitfalls. This is for us the foundation of coding responsibly, because in our understanding, with all the disasters and all the mishaps that have happened, I don't believe they were done on purpose. So even though they were not done on purpose, they still happened. So something else must be done. And in our understanding, raising awareness on where potential mishaps can happen and educating people in that area is what this group is, like the AI ethics governance group is about.
Thank you, Agnes. So Eva, you're also a founding member of ThinkTech. Would you like to elaborate a bit more of your involvement in the initiative and where you see its value at?
Yeah, so I think actually the amount of technology that rely on artificial intelligence, that increases every day. And there are so many technologies that are used by millions of people every day. And so I'm gonna like kind of show my point with an example, and that is in social media we have something that's called a recommender system, where a machine learning model predicts which posts are interesting for a certain user. And then the model will, or the social media platform will only show the posts that receive a very high ranking by the recommender system to the user. And this is like a really great invention, right? Because it keeps the users interested, it keeps them engaged, and that's what the software wants. And I mean, that's a really cool thing. However, I think something that we also need to keep in mind is that it's problematic because the rules that the machine learning system is using kind of to promote content, they are not very transparent. And so in the past, for example, if one newspaper was publishing a controversial opinion, then a different newspaper could state a different perspective. And nowadays, if you have a user posting some kind of conspiracy theory or something like this, then this might be shown to a lot of other users without anybody who has a different opinion noticing that. So it's not very transparent anymore. And this is kind of a very critical change, in my opinion, in how we form our opinion and how people might be influenced in their political leaning or something like this. And that's why I think we need to discuss some certain questions here. So we need to discuss, do we want to have a control instance in this field? And if we want this, how do we implement this? So I think that everybody kind of should engage in the discussion. Coming back to your question, this is something that concerns everybody because everybody uses this technology. And of course, it concerns young professionals in the tech industry because they need to implement this, but it also concerns politicians and journalists and everybody, honestly, because that's, that issue is just so diverse, kind of.
The example Eva mentioned is a great example how these systems enter our private life. And they have very, very strong impact and on a big scale. And the question I had at that time, and I still have, which rules are in place for this? What is the framework where I could somehow navigate upon? And I didn't find very good answers, to be frank. So there were no clear guidelines on what you do, what you don't do, and how you do things. Yeah, it's you develop an algorithm, or you find a new optimization algorithm, and then you publish it, and then it's out there. Yeah, and this is how a lot of things work in science world. And my question is, or was, so who's then responsible for this algorithm? And to put it more optimistic, so who's responsible then to make responsible algorithms? And this came to what led to Conscious Coders and ThinkTech, that it's basically also the people that develop the algorithms. So all the developers or scientists working on AI systems, and they do the first steps. They know the technology, they know the pitfalls, the shortcomings. So it's their responsibility on what they do and what they don't do. After we started Conscious Coders, we thought, okay, let's just think about it, and then we do it good. Yeah, we don't do it bad, at least. But it's not that simple, because we realized if you're just talking with colleagues or friends from university, you always you come to a point where you say, okay, what is then in the end good, or what is bad? How should we do it responsibly then? And this is really challenging. This is what we learned. And this is why we also started to get more people involved from different spheres and different study courses at the beginning, where we said, okay, we want to really understand, besides understanding the technology, what is out there, also to see how would we describe the world where we want to live in? How do we define good technology that is responsible or socially aligned, as some initiatives call it, And this is really, this is a hard work, and it's, you can't only do it within your sphere or your initiative. But we learned we need to have some outreach, to talk to people outside, to get the perspective of users of the society, and then take it back and to think about, okay, how do we turn this, these expectations, these hopes, but also this understanding gap of technology, then back to how we develop it and what we put into code, what tests we write, and so on.
Is there receptiveness to this type of thinking?
Yeah, so actually, I do think that there are lots of people that are very receptive for these topics. And it's also because these topics are becoming more and more popular. I mean, you can see that if you go on Netflix, now there are like two or three different movies on Netflix about these kind of things, like The Social Dilemma, and then Coded Bias is coming out. And like that shows that this is becoming like a hip thing to talk about. And maybe that's why, but I hope actually also because people do realize that they have a responsibility. That's also why they are interested in hearing about it. And actually, I was doing an internship before I started my current job. And then I was in a company that is criticized a lot in Germany. And I was kind of expecting that people wouldn't like to talk about the things they are criticized for. But actually, my manager sat down with me one day and was like, I heard that you're like in this AI and ethics initiative, like tell me more about it. And we got talking about these topics and also about the criticism from that company. It was really great to have somebody to talk about this and see that they're interested. So yeah, I do think that people are becoming more and more eager to take on responsibility.
And would you say that's because of public pressure or because we are becoming better at demystifying what ethics is in this context?
I would say the later.
I would like to refer back to Eva and agree in her point that people become more aware of it and companies as well are interested in it. However, I would say the challenge is what that actually translates to, because it's really hard to have deterministic rules for a variety of cases, to say generalized rules that developers or decision makers can always adhere to. So while within companies or the companies I've talked to, there is a general agreement that this is an important topic and should be taken up. It becomes much harder, much more complicated once there is the question of what this actually means. Because as I said, few deterministic rules. So what else is there to say? And I would argue that the way to approach this is rather complicated. It's really not deterministic because the challenge is that the people shaping these algorithms and the way they are implemented within society have a certain perspective, and they may not necessarily see all the challenges that are the pitfalls that may happen. So even with best intentions, they may not see all of them. So as a consequence, raising the awareness of where potential pitfalls may occur is a first step to raise this moral awareness, so that the individual developers and decision makers may have a closer look at potentially critical decisions. But the second step, in my opinion, is to go towards a more inter- and transdisciplinary collaboration, because when people of diverging perspectives, that really can be diverging in all kinds of areas, whether it's educational or geographical, or just professional, or just like different life experiences come together, their perspectives may complement each other and may pick up on potential issues that a singular perspective would have not. Translating this into a professional workflow, however, is much more expensive, much more complicated, and that's where I currently see the largest challenge in realizing those ideas.
So to translating the need for a process of addressing pitfalls, bringing transdisciplinary expertises together, and also ensuring right type of diversity.
Absolutely.
If I summarize you correctly.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, it would be great if this moral awareness was already talked and worked on in school. However, I think it's a topic that you're never done with. I don't think it's something that you can gain and keep your whole life. I think it's continuous work, and that's how I see it. Just constantly working on showing potential pitfalls or making people realize how they come to certain conclusions and whether there are any implicit biases, unconscious biases there that they may not be aware of.
So it's still a lot in the hands of every developer or individual to find the right tool, because there's a big gap from the aspirations, maybe also of legislation, of the guidelines which are there, which are often very high level, but still to bridge the last gap from this high level goals that we have on fairness, on accountability, on explainability. If you need to deliver a product which has like certain requirements, you need just to fulfill them, but then also going this step further to say, okay, we want to also ensure that it's not biased, that it's fair, that it's robust against different input data. I think there, the discussion has somehow matured, but it's not yet like far from the goal for sure. But this is, I think, where the discussion went to also in our group as more members are now just growing out of university and turning into professional world.
This is a discussion that's been going on in the AI ethics field for quite some time, this issue around translating policy to practice, or as you were saying, aspirations to practice, which is a nice way of looking at it.
It's in the small bits that you need to do on your daily basis that you really need to bridge this gap often by yourself. You read the law and think, okay, is this still is it an edge case, or so is it still within the legal framework, or are we going one step too far? So this is so every day. It's not like you learn it and then you're able to do it. So it's not a skill. It's more. I think you need to get the experience also to navigate through it. So maybe it's not like learning to swim. It's more like being able to navigate through difficult terrain. So every day to try your best again to build good models, to do the necessary tests, but also to be frank and discuss with your colleagues, and to be open for feedback, getting active feedback, and bring this to the table where you think, okay, here we might need to discuss the limitations of the model we are building.
So the individual responsibility is something that weighs on you and others in your field as well on a daily basis, how to mitigate any, or how to manage the trade-offs constantly.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a lot of trade-offs. Yeah, because you have some final delivery and you try to get the way until they're as good as possible. But in the end, it's on you. You build the code and you make the decisions and you try to make them as good as possible.
I think the hardest part often is that most of the technology that working on has two sides. Sometimes you would like to create a new software, and then you are very eager about it because you think it will do a lot of good, but you need to always think about it twice because it might have a flip side, and then this might be the flip side that it's not good.
So Agnes, over to you. Is there a generational gap?
I think the knowledge on, for example, machine learning, the basics, are fairly accessible these days. So maybe within my generation, there is a higher affinity to access this knowledge and to put the question of whether I would trust a machine like that into context. So I think it's nice to see that the younger generation is really involved in this and has a high technological understanding, but I would wish that my parents' generation, for example, would also be more open to it. There are many horror stories around artificial intelligence, and that'd be the first thing they'd know about. So I'm sometimes having a hard time explaining the exact flip side that Eva was talking about. There's a lot of potential, it's great potential, but the technology itself isn't necessarily bad in itself. It really depends how it is created and how it is implemented. So calling it all evil is not going to get us anywhere. So yeah, having this awareness, this differentiation on how these technologies are created and implemented may get us further in the discussion on how to deal with this.
So Lukas, 4 years have passed since you initiated ThinkTech, or Conscious Coders, that was called initially. What has happened since you started? Like, what has happened in these 4 years? Both in the technology domain and also the way you see that the initiative has evolved.
4 years ago, there were hardly any initiatives working on AI ethics. But what I've seen in the last 4 years, a lot of initiatives have come up. One from industry consortia, but also from universities. New chairs and study programs have been created. Also NGOs came up. We see a lot of initiatives from governments. And there definitely a lot of things have changed from the technology. What I see, technology have progressed rapidly. We see one thing that's called AutoML, where you don't need to program everything by yourself, but a lot is already pre-programmed. Yeah, so you can use it like as a toolbox, and you can just use very sophisticated algorithms already for classification. Tasks, for example, which are just out there in the cloud, and you can use it as soon as you have access to the cloud. So
what's usually referred to as open source software?
Yeah, one definitely open source software, but also from software providers that just give you a classification tool that you can use by yourself. And this spread both for professionals, for developers that you mentioned, like open source, where you can basically access every component you want and build up your own AI system, but also for end users that have access to cloud, from business intelligence, where they can just already use ready AI tools for their work. So this has progressed a lot in the last 4 years.
Because of availability, is there a temptation of doing more that may sort of take us in a bad direction? Is there awareness around responsible uses with everything that is made available, as you said, for free or without necessarily knowing how to use it responsibly?
That's an interesting point. I have two things that I would add here. One is definitely open source technology, but also open data. I think what we have seen in the last year, that is a lot of data just being openly, and you can use the data, and data is like high data quality and numerous data volume is the core of many models. So here we definitely see, besides all the open source models, AI is highly driven from open source. We see a high openness. The second twist, what I tend to see in the scientific world, is a bit of temptation to release everything. So we had it with the GPT-2 model, which is a language generation model. So there was a hesitation at first to release that model fully, the pre-trained model fully. The model is able to generate text, big text, out of a few sentences. And the fear was there that out of just a few sentences, you could create almost human or human level text, that a human could not detect that it's really from a machine. And the view was there that there's a lot of false spread of misinformation online, and false news and fake news. So this is why at the beginning the researchers were hesitant in releasing the full model. So I see it from both sides. Some researchers or developers are increasingly aware of it and tend not to release it. But on the other hand, there's so many out there, open source communities growing rapidly, and all the also the code and the data out there. So it's a bit the two sides.
And Agnes, building on what Lukas was just alluding to, and there are obviously some red lines in terms of applications and deployment of technologies. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it is really challenging. I think the language model that Lukas just talked about, if I'm not mistaken, has similar word embeddings that show patterns that may be regarded as unfair than we see in society, because the data really just represents, to a certain degree, society, and society may not necessarily be completely as we would like it to be. So I think it really is the discussion of how we alter the data or how we use the data, and whether we aim for replication of the data and the existing societal state, or whether we want to actively alter that to reach a certain level of equality, for example, as it be in, for example, gender, that we can easily see in language models and language embeddings.
Maybe I can add something to what Agnes said before, which also shows why I'm so motivated. She mentioned that there's so many challenges, and the fact that some language modules are discriminating and are not equally good for example, different genders, is obviously something that we should work on and that we should eliminate. But then the question always comes up is like, if we equalize the data sets, if we say we're going to take as many men recordings and as many women recordings into the data set, for example, to make sure that this is stable and this is equalized, then maybe the data set will shrink and the whole performance of the system will be worse. And that's something that we need to kind of discuss. Like, what do we want? Do we want to just move forward with innovation, or do we want to, something that Lukas always says, hinder invention by trying to make it, to doing it right? And that's something that I think is a huge challenge, and that's something that I don't know how to answer myself. And that's what's keeping me motivated, because I feel like that's still an open challenge, that's still an open question, and that's something that I would like to work on in the future.
I see that there are a lot of challenges within our society that are historically grown, that they manifest through the technology these days, as we have these data sets, as we build models from the data, from the historic data, but also that we see if we deploy these models in our societies, that also challenges can come from these new models. So my goal is that we don't ask the questions, do we want the technology with all its consequences, or we don't include and deploy the technology. So I still have the belief and the hope that we are able to build this technology in a responsible way, and to use it and like harness all the benefits that the technology has.
I would also add that as we have talked about before, it has become a much more well-known topic. Many have heard of AI ethics, so it shows that we're working in the right direction, or a direction that is demanded. And at the same time, the discussions are becoming more specific. We're working on more concrete projects, and yeah, some of them are not in the mainstream discourse yet, so it definitely shows us that we still have some work to do to shine some light on those questions and how to approach this.
For those who are interested in how they can replicate conscious coding in their own environment, what are the key takeaways you would like to share with our listeners?
I think the key learning that I had during like founding this initiative is make your voice heard, and I think that's for all the listeners. You have an important voice, and your role is important. So everyone out there, it doesn't matter what age you have a take in there, and you should really make use of your voice, engage, search for like-minded people, for peers, engage with them, discuss, just start it. I think that's the hardest step.
And that's actually exactly one of the reasons why I'm really happy and thankful that we were invited by the Carnegie Council, because I feel like this is some platform that gives us a way to be heard, and that's what we're working for. So thank you.
You're most welcome. This is Anja Kaspersen, and to listen again or share this show, go to the Carnegie Council website, and on it you can also subscribe to any news updates about the AI/EI initiative and related activities by the Carnegie Council. I would like to thank the great team at the Carnegie Council responsible for doing this podcast. And this podcast is supported by the Carnegie Council for Ethics and International Affairs.